The small town of Willow Creek was known for its quiet charm, where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. Life moved slowly there, except when it came to the local high school. At Willow Creek High, things were often anything but dull. Among the students, two names stood out more than most: Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt. They weren't just classmates, they were rivals, though no one could quite agree on how it had started. Some said it began over grades, others claimed it was about attention from teachers. Whatever the reason, their rivalry dominated the hallways and classrooms. Jasmine Crockett was hard to miss. She had long, dark hair that she always styled perfectly, and her sharp green eyes missed nothing. She was confident, outspoken, and quick-witted, qualities that made her both admired and feared among her peers. Jasmine thrived on being the center of attention, whether it was during debates, presentations, or even casual conversations in the cafeteria. If someone dared to challenge her, she would respond with a cutting remark that left them speechless. It wasn't cruelty exactly, it was more like a game to her, one she played exceptionally well. Karoline Leavitt, on the other hand, was quieter and more reserved. She had short blonde hair that framed her face neatly, and her blue eyes carried a sense of calm determination. Unlike Jasmine, Karoline didn't seek the spotlight. She preferred working behind the scenes, pouring her energy into projects and ideas that fascinated her. While many dismissed her as shy or unremarkable, those who took the time to get to know her discovered a mind brimming with creativity and ambition. Karoline dreamed big, not because she wanted fame, but because she believed humanity could achieve incredible things if people dared to try. Their latest clash occurred during a class discussion about interstellar exploration. Mr. Peterson, the science teacher, had assigned the topic as part of a larger project leading up to the regional science fair. He encouraged his students to think boldly and come up with innovative solutions for traveling beyond Earth's solar system. Most of the class groaned at the idea, but Jasmine immediately seized the opportunity. "This is perfect," she declared, leaning forward in her seat. "I've already got some ideas." Karoline listened silently, jotting notes in her notebook. When Mr. Peterson asked for volunteers to share their thoughts, Jasmine raised her hand without hesitation. Standing up, she launched into a passionate explanation of faster-than-light travel using theoretical wormholes. Her voice filled the room, and she gestured animatedly, drawing imaginary diagrams in the air. The rest of the class watched in awe, nodding along as she spoke. Jasmine concluded with a flourish, earning applause from several classmates. Then Mr. Peterson turned to Karoline. "What about you, Karoline? Do you have any ideas?" Karoline hesitated before standing. She wasn't used to speaking in front of large groups, but she'd spent hours researching potential technologies. Taking a deep breath, she began describing a concept inspired by quantum entanglement, a method of instantaneous communication across vast distances. Her voice wavered at first, but as she continued, she grew more confident. She explained how such technology could revolutionize space exploration, allowing humans to explore distant galaxies without worrying about time delays. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then Jasmine laughed, breaking the tension. "Quantum entanglement?" she scoffed, shaking her head. "That's not practical. It's just a theory, and even if it worked, it wouldn't solve the real problem: getting ships to move faster than light." She smirked, glancing around the room for support. "Honestly, Karoline, your ideas are cute, but they're not realistic." The comment stung, but Karoline forced herself to stay calm. She opened her mouth to respond, but Jasmine cut her off. "You should stick to simpler topics, ones that actually make sense," Jasmine added, her tone dripping with condescension. A few students chuckled nervously, unsure whether to side with Jasmine or defend Karoline. Karoline felt her cheeks burn, but she refused to let Jasmine see how much the words hurt. Instead, she sat down quietly, focusing on keeping her expression neutral. Inside, however, she felt crushed. She had put so much effort into her research only to be dismissed so casually. For the rest of the class, She avoided eye contact with everyone, including Jasmine, who seemed oblivious to the impact of her words. Unbeknownst to Karoline, someone in the room had noticed everything. Daniel Leavitt, Karoline's father, sat in the back row observing the exchange with growing concern. He had accompanied Karoline to school that morning because he needed to speak with Mr. Peterson about volunteering as a guest lecturer. Now, he found himself witnessing something unexpected and troubling. As a former scientist, Daniel understood the importance of encouraging young minds to dream big. Hearing Jasmine mock Karoline's ideas angered him, but what bothered him more was seeing his daughter shrink under the weight of criticism. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Daniel waited until the room cleared out before approaching Mr. Peterson. "That was quite the debate," he remarked casually, nodding toward the empty seats. "Those two seem to have strong opinions," Mr. Peterson chuckled. "Yes, Jasmine and Karoline are quite the pair. They push each other, which can be good sometimes. Other times—" He trailed off, shrugging. "It's all part of learning, I suppose." Daniel nodded thoughtfully, though his expression remained serious. "I hope so," he said softly. "But I worry that some students might take things too far. My daughter takes pride in her work, and hearing it dismissed like that, it must have been difficult for her." Mr. Peterson frowned, considering this. "I'll keep an eye on them," he promised, "and maybe encourage Jasmine to tone it down a bit. Talent shouldn't come at the expense of kindness." As Daniel left the classroom, he resolved to talk to Karoline about what happened. He knew she wouldn't want to dwell on it, but he also knew she needed reassurance. No matter how talented Jasmine might be, Daniel believed that true greatness came not from tearing others down, but from lifting them up. And if anyone could rise above petty rivalries, it was his daughter. Little did Daniel or anyone else know that this moment would set the stage for something extraordinary. What began as a simple classroom argument would soon spiral into a journey that challenged expectations, tested friendships, and pushed the boundaries of human imagination further than ever before. But for now, the seeds of change had been planted, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Karoline walked home that afternoon feeling heavy, as though the weight of Jasmine's words still clung to her. She replayed the classroom scene over and over in her mind, each time hearing Jasmine's dismissive laugh and cruel remarks with fresh clarity. By the time she reached her house, tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. Crying wouldn't fix anything, she told herself. Still, the sting of being mocked in front of everyone lingered, making it hard to focus on anything else. Her father, Daniel, noticed immediately that something was wrong. He was sitting in the living room reading a book when Karoline came through the door. She tried to act normal, tossing her backpack onto the couch and muttering a quick "hi." But Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders and the way she avoided meeting his gaze. Setting his book aside, he stood up and followed her into the kitchen. "Hey, kiddo," he said gently, leaning against the counter as she poured herself a glass of water. "You okay?" Karoline hesitated, gripping the edge of the sink. For a moment, she considered brushing him off with a vague, "I'm fine." But then she sighed, turning to face him. "Not really," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel nodded, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table. "Come sit down. Tell me what happened." Reluctantly, Karoline joined him, cradling a mug of hot cocoa he quickly prepared for her. At first, she struggled to find the right words, but once she started talking, the story spilled out. She told him about the class discussion, her presentation on quantum entanglement, and how Jasmine had mocked her ideas in front of everyone. "She made me sound stupid," Karoline said, her voice trembling. "Like my research didn't matter at all." Daniel listened quietly, his brow furrowed. When she finished, he reached across the table and placed a hand over hers. "First of all, I want you to know that your ideas do matter," he said firmly. "What you're thinking about, quantum entanglement, faster-than-light travel, it's not childish or unrealistic. It's ambitious, and ambition is a good thing." Karoline looked down at her mug, unconvinced. "But what if she's right? What if my ideas aren't practical? Maybe I should just stick to simpler stuff." "No," Daniel interrupted. his tone sharp enough to make her look up. Don't let anyone tell you to stop dreaming big, especially not someone like Jasmine. He paused, his expression softening. Do you remember the stories I used to tell you when you were little? About the projects I worked on before you were born? Karoline nodded slowly. She remembered snippets, how her dad had been involved in cutting-edge technology, how he'd talked about exploring space and pushing boundaries. But those stories always felt distant, almost like fairy tales. Yeah, but that was a long time ago, right? Things change. They do, Daniel agreed. But some things stay the same. He stood up and disappeared into the hallway, returning a few minutes later with a dusty cardboard box. Placing it on the table, he opened it carefully, revealing stacks of papers, faded photographs, and rolled-up blueprints. This, he said, tapping the box, is proof that big dreams can become real. Curious despite herself, Karoline leaned forward to examine the contents. There were diagrams of engines she didn't recognize, calculations scribbled in pencil, and official-looking documents stamped with government seals. One photograph showed a group of scientists standing in front of a sleek metallic machine, their faces glowing with excitement. Daniel pointed to himself in the picture, younger and smiling broadly. What is all this? Karoline asked, her voice tinged with awe. This, Daniel explained, was Project Horizon. Back in the day, we were working on developing faster-than-life travel technology. We weren't just theorizing, it was hands-on experimentation. We actually built prototypes. Karoline's eyes widened. Faster than life, like breaking the speed of light? Exactly, Daniel confirmed. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of skeptics who thought it was impossible. Sound familiar? He gave her a knowing smile. But we proved them wrong, at least for a while. So why did you stop? Karoline asked, frowning. If it worked, why isn't this kind of tech everywhere now? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Politics mostly. Funding got cut, priorities shifted, and eventually the project was shelved. But the knowledge didn't disappear. All of this, he gestured to the box, is still valid. And now it's yours. Karoline stared at him, stunned. Mine? You mean, you want me to use this? I think you already have, Daniel replied. Your idea about quantum entanglement, it reminded me so much of what we were trying to achieve back then. Communication across distances, instantaneous travel, it's all connected. You've got a natural talent for this kind of thinking. Karoline, don't let anyone convince you otherwise. For the first time since leaving school, Karoline felt a spark of hope ignite within her. She picked up one of the blueprints, studying the intricate designs. Do you really think I can make something like this work? She asked hesitantly. I know you can, Daniel said with absolute certainty. But it won't be easy. You'll need to study hard, experiment, and maybe even fail a few times along the way. But if you're willing to put in the effort, I believe you can take these ideas further than anyone ever has. The more they talked, the more excited Karoline became. She spent hours poring over the materials in the box, asking questions and jotting down notes. Daniel stayed by her side, answering patiently and encouraging her whenever she doubted herself. By the time they finally went to bed, Karoline's earlier sadness had transformed into determination. She realized that Jasmine's mockery hadn't broken her. It had pushed her to dig deeper, to uncover something truly extraordinary. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Karoline couldn't help but smile. For years, she'd dreamed of contributing to humanity's understanding of the universe. Now, thanks to her father's hidden legacy, she had the tools to turn those dreams into reality. Tomorrow, she decided, would mark the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her, but for everyone who dared to look beyond the stars. Unbeknownst to Karoline, her journey was about to intersect with Jasmine's in ways neither of them could predict. While Karoline embraced her newfound purpose, Jasmine remained oblivious to the storm brewing on the horizon. The rivalry that had started with a classroom argument was far from over, but next time, the stakes would be higher than either girl imagined. News traveled fast in Willow Creek High School, especially when it involved Jasmine Crockett. The very next day after their classroom debate, Jasmine made an announcement during lunch that caught everyone's attention. Standing on a bench in Biaire, the cafeteria, she held up a flyer for the upcoming regional science fair and declared, "I'm entering this competition, and I'm going to win." Her voice rang out confidently, drawing cheers from her friends and curious glances from others. "I've been working on something groundbreaking," she continued, lowering her voice slightly to build suspense. "It's a fully functional model of advanced propulsion systems, technology so innovative it'll blow everyone away." A few students clapped, impressed by her boldness, while others exchanged skeptical looks. Jasmine didn't care. She thrived on being the center of attention. As she stepped down from the bench, she noticed Karoline sitting quietly at a nearby table, scribbling notes in her notebook. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Jasmine smirked, tilting her head slightly as if daring Karoline to challenge her. But Karoline simply looked back without saying a word, her expression unreadable. Something about her calm demeanor unnerved Jasmine, though she quickly brushed it off. "She's probably too scared to even try," Jasmine muttered under her breath before walking away. What Jasmine didn't know was that Karoline had already made up her mind to enter the competition. That evening, Karoline sat at her desk surrounded by papers, blueprints, and sketches inspired by her father's research. She had spent hours refining her concept, combining elements of quantum entanglement with Daniel's faster-than-life theories. It wasn't just theoretical anymore. She was building a prototype. Though it wouldn't be easy, she felt driven by a newfound sense of purpose. This wasn't just about proving herself to Jasmine or anyone else. It was about showing the world what was possible. The next morning, Karoline submitted her entry form for the science fair. When word got out that she was competing against Jasmine, whispers spread like wildfire through the school. Some students were intrigued, wondering how Karoline could possibly match Jasmine's polished presentations. Others openly doubted her abilities, assuming she'd rely entirely on her father's old work. Even teachers seemed divided, with Mr. Peterson encouraging both girls to aim high while others dismissed Karoline's chances outright. Jasmine heard about Karoline's decision during biology class and laughed dismissively. "Of course she's entering," she said to her friend Lisa, rolling her eyes. "Probably thinks she can ride on her dad's coattails or something. Honestly, it's pathetic." Lisa hesitated, glancing toward Karoline, who was focused on labeling slides at the lab table. "Do you really think she doesn't have original ideas? Maybe she's smarter than we give her credit for." "Please," Jasmine scoffed. "Even if she does manage to scrape together something decent, it won't compare to what I'm doing. My project is going to be perfect. Just wait and see." Despite her bravado, Jasmine couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Karoline might actually pose a threat. Over the next few weeks, she threw herself into her project, spending late nights tweaking designs and rehearsing her presentation. Meanwhile, Karoline worked tirelessly in her garage-turned-lab, piecing together components and running simulations. Neither girl mentioned the other directly, but their focus intensified as the competition drew closer. As the day of the science fair approached, excitement and tension built throughout the school. Flyers plastered on every bulletin board reminded students to attend, promising mind-blowing innovations and the future of space exploration. Teachers encouraged participation, while parents buzzed about which projects would stand out. For Jasmine and Karoline, however, the stakes felt deeply personal. To Jasmine, winning meant proving once and for all that she was the best. To Karoline, it meant showing that her dreams weren't as far-fetched as people thought, and maybe even honoring her father's legacy in the process. On the morning of the fair, both girls arrived early to set up their displays. Jasmine's booth was sleek and professional, featuring a polished scale model of her propulsion system alongside detailed diagrams and equations. She dressed sharply in a tailored blazer, exuding confidence as judges and spectators began to trickle in. Karoline's setup, by contrast, was simpler, but no less impressive. Her prototype, a small device connected to a laptop, sat on a plain, wooden table beside printed explanations of her theory. She wore a plain sweater and jeans, looking more nervous than usual, but determined nonetheless. As visitors moved between booths, many gravitated toward Jasmine's display first. Her charisma and polished explanations captivated audiences, earning nods of approval from judges and murmurs of admiration from classmates. "This is incredible," one judge remarked, examining her model closely. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this." Not far away, Karoline demonstrated her prototype to a smaller crowd. At first glance, it seemed unassuming compared to Jasmine's flashy exhibit. But when she activated the simulation, jaws dropped. On the laptop screen, particles appeared to communicate instantaneously across vast distances, mimicking the principles of quantum entanglement. Spectators watched in awe as Karoline explained how such technology could revolutionize space travel, allowing humanity to explore galaxies beyond imagination. One judge asked skeptically, "But is this practical? Can it really work outside of a controlled environment?" Karoline nodded calmly. "It's still in its early stages, but the math checks out. With further development, this could become a reality, not just a theory." Her words resonated with several judges, who lingered longer than expected, asking questions and taking notes. Some students whispered among themselves, admitting they hadn't expected Karoline's project to be so advanced. Even Jasmine, glancing over occasionally, seemed momentarily unsettled, but she quickly masked her unease with a tight smile. By the end of the day, both girls had given everything they had. Jasmine basked in the praise she received, convinced she had secured victory. Karoline, exhausted but satisfied, packed up her materials knowing she'd done her best. As the judges retreated to deliberate, the atmosphere grew tense. Students gathered around, speculating about who would win. Some rooted for Jasmine, citing her undeniable talent and charm. Others quietly hoped for Karoline, inspired by her quiet determination and groundbreaking ideas. Neither girl realized that the outcome of the science fair would change more than just their reputations. It would force them to confront not only their strengths but also their weaknesses, and ultimately reveal truths about themselves they hadn't anticipated. The auditorium buzzed with excitement as everyone waited for the judges to announce the winners of the regional science fair. Students whispered eagerly among themselves, speculating about who would take home first place. Teachers glanced at their watches, trying to gauge how much longer the deliberation might take. Parents sat proudly in the back rows, snapping photos and cheering whenever someone's name was mentioned. But all eyes were really on two people, Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt. Jasmine stood confidently beside her display, occasionally adjusting the placement of her polished scale model or smoothing out the edges of her diagrams. She smiled brightly at anyone who walked past, making sure they noticed the sophistication of her work. When a judge approached to ask a final question, she answered smoothly, her voice steady and rehearsed. "This design represents years of theoretical research," she explained, gesturing toward her equations. "It's not just innovative, it's practical. With enough funding, this could be the future of space exploration." Nearby, Karoline remained quiet, her focus entirely on her prototype. She checked the connections between the device and her laptop one last time, ensuring everything was ready for demonstration. Though she didn't seek attention like Jasmine did, spectators couldn't help but notice her project. The simulation, running on the screen, showed particles communicating instantly across vast distances, mimicking the principles of quantum entanglement. It wasn't flashy or glamorous, but it was undeniably fascinating. When a judge stopped to ask Karoline about her concept, she spoke softly but clearly. "Quantum entanglement isn't just a theory anymore," she said, pointing to the data displayed on her laptop. "With this technology, we could send information, and eventually spacecraft, across unimaginable distances without worrying about time delays. It's still early, but it works." Her tone carried conviction, and several listeners nodded approvingly, impressed by her depth of knowledge. As the judges finished their rounds, the crowd settled into their seats, anticipation crackling in the air. Finally, the head judge stepped up to the microphone, silencing the murmurs with a single tap. Thank you all for your hard work and dedication, he began, scanning the room. Every participant here today has demonstrated incredible creativity and skill. However, there can only be one winner. Jasmine straightened her posture, her lips curving into a triumphant smile. She glanced briefly at Karoline, expecting to see nervousness, or worse, defeat, but instead found her rival standing calmly, hands clasped loosely in front of her. For a split second, Jasmine felt a flicker of doubt. Could Karoline actually win? No, she shook off the thought almost immediately. There was no way her own project wouldn't come out on top. And the winner of this year's regional science fair, the judge continued, pausing dramatically, is Karoline Leavitt. The room erupted into applause, though some cheers sounded hesitant, as if people weren't quite sure what to make of the result. Karoline blinked in surprise, then broke into a wide grin. She stepped forward to accept her trophy, her father Daniel watching proudly from the back row. As she shook hands with the judges, she caught sight of Jasmine out of the corner of her eye. Jasmine's face had gone pale, her jaw clenched tightly as she forced a polite smile. Well done, Jasmine muttered under her breath when Karoline passed by on her way back to her booth. The words were barely audible, but Karoline heard them anyway. Instead of responding, she simply nodded and returned to her display, where classmates and judges alike swarmed to congratulate her. For Jasmine, the loss stung more than she cared to admit. She had expected to breeze through the competition, leaving everyone, including Karoline, in her shadow. Instead, she found herself relegated to second place, her polished presentation overshadowed by Karoline's groundbreaking prototype. Anger simmered beneath her surface as she packed up her materials, avoiding eye contact with anyone who tried to offer consolation. Later that evening, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation. Sitting alone in her bedroom, she replayed the events of the day over and over in her mind. How had Karoline managed to beat her? Was it luck? Or had she genuinely created something better? The questions gnawed at her until she finally decided to confront the source of her frustration directly. The next afternoon, Jasmine showed up unannounced at the Leavitt's house. Daniel answered the door, surprised to see her. "Can I help you?" he asked cautiously, stepping outside to avoid disturbing Karoline, who was working in the garage. "I want to know where she got it," Jasmine demanded, her voice sharp. "That project, it wasn't hers, was it? She must have copied it from somewhere, or maybe you helped her too much. Either way, it's not fair." Daniel crossed his arms, his expression calm but firm. Karoline worked incredibly hard on her project. Everything she presented was her own idea, built using concepts she studied and developed herself. If anything, she drew inspiration from my old research, but that doesn't mean it wasn't original. Jasmine scoffed, shaking her head. Old research? That's convenient. So she just happened to stumble upon some genius-level plans lying around the house? "It's not about convenience," Daniel replied, his tone growing stern. "It's about effort." Karoline spent weeks studying, experimenting, and refining her ideas. She didn't rely on shortcuts or borrowed theories. And frankly, Jasmine, accusing her of cheating says more about your attitude than it does about her abilities. His words hit Jasmine like a slap. She opened her mouth to argue but found herself at a loss. Deep down, she knew he was right. Her accusations stemmed from jealousy, not evidence. Still, admitting that felt impossible. Instead, she muttered something vague about needing to leave and hurried away before Daniel could say anything else. Back home. Jasmine paced her room, wrestling with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to dismiss the entire situation, to convince herself that Karoline's victory was meaningless. But another part, quieter yet persistent, refused to let go. What if Daniel was telling the truth? What if Karoline really had earned her win? The thought unsettled Jasmine, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. Over the next few days, Jasmine avoided Karoline at school, pretending to focus solely on her classes. But inside, she couldn't stop thinking about the science fair. She began revisiting her own project, scrutinizing every detail. The more she examined it, the clearer it became. Her design, while impressive, lacked the depth and innovation of Karoline's. It was polished, yes, but ultimately derivative, a rehashing of existing ideas rather than something truly new. For the first time in her life, Jasmine felt a pang of self-doubt. She had always prided herself on being the best, on excelling without effort. Now, faced with the reality of her shortcomings, she realized how hollow that pride had been. Winning wasn't enough if it came at the expense of growth, or worse, kindness. One evening, Jasmine sat at her desk surrounded by notes and sketches. Slowly, deliberately, she began brainstorming ways to improve her project. Drawing inspiration from Karoline's work, she started exploring new possibilities, concepts she had dismissed before as impractical or overly ambitious. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream bigger, to push beyond the limits she had imposed on herself. Unbeknownst to Jasmine, her journey of reflection marked the beginning of a shift, not just within her, but between her and Karoline. Their rivalry, once defined by mockery and resentment, now hinted at the potential for something greater: collaboration. Neither girl knew it yet, but the seeds of change had already been planted, waiting to bloom into something extraordinary. Weeks had passed since the science fair, and life in Willow Creek seemed to settle back into its usual rhythm. Karoline returned to her quiet routine, focusing on refining her prototype and exploring new ideas inspired by her father's research. Jasmine, however, couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. Her second-place finish gnawed at her pride, but even worse was the realization that she might not be as untouchable as she'd always believed. Every day at school, Jasmine avoided crossing paths with Karoline. She told herself it was because she didn't care, that Karoline's victory wasn't worth acknowledging, but deep down she knew better. Seeing Karoline reminded her of her own failure, and more painfully, of the flaws Daniel Leavitt had pointed out during their confrontation. Jasmine hated feeling vulnerable, especially when it came to someone she had once dismissed so easily. But one afternoon, something changed. Jasmine sat alone in the library after school, flipping through pages of scientific journals and scribbling notes in her notebook. Since the science fair, she had begun revisiting old theories and experimenting with new ones. Her initial goal had been to fix her project, to prove that she could create something just as groundbreaking as Karoline's. But as she worked, she started noticing patterns and connections she'd never considered before. Her ideas grew bolder, more innovative, and for the first time she felt genuinely excited about her work. Still, there was a problem. No matter how much progress she made, Jasmine couldn't ignore the fact that her breakthroughs were inspired, at least partially, by Karoline's research. It wasn't copying exactly. Rather, it was building upon concepts she had initially dismissed as impractical. That realization left her conflicted. On one hand, she wanted to take credit for her improvements. On the other, she knew she owed some acknowledgement to the person who had sparked her inspiration. After days of wrestling with her thoughts, Jasmine finally decided to act. One Saturday morning, she gathered her notes and sketches into a neatly organized binder, slipped it under her arm, and walked to the Leavitt's house. Her heart pounded as she approached the front door. What would Karoline say? Would Daniel turn her away? For a moment, she considered turning back, but then she reminded herself why she was there. This wasn't just about fixing her project anymore. It was about proving she could rise above her mistakes. When Daniel opened the door, he looked surprised to see her. "Jasmine," he said cautiously, stepping aside to let her in. "What brings you here?" I need to talk to Karoline," Jasmine stammered, clutching her notebook tightly. "And maybe you too, Mr. Leavitt, if that's okay." Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Come on in. Karoline's in the garage working on her prototype. Let me get her." While he fetched his daughter, Jasmine stood awkwardly in the living room, glancing around at the cozy space. Photographs lined the walls, capturing family moments over the years. There was a warmth here that contrasted sharply with the cold competitiveness Jasmine had grown accustomed to. For the first time, she wondered what it must have been like to grow up in such an environment, to be encouraged to dream big instead of being pushed to win at all costs. Karoline arrived a few minutes later, looking equally surprised to see Jasmine. "Hey," she said uncertainly, lingering near the doorway. What's going on? Jasmine hesitated, unsure where to begin. Finally, she held out the notebook. I've been working on my project again, she admitted. Trying to improve it and, well, I realized something. A lot of my new ideas came from your presentation at the science fair. From your prototype. Karoline blinked, clearly caught off guard. Oh, okay. Did you want to ask me about it or something? Not just ask, Jasmine replied quickly. I wanted to show you. She opened the notebook and flipped through the pages, revealing detailed sketches and calculations. See, I started thinking about how quantum entanglement could integrate with propulsion systems. At first I thought it was impossible, but then I figured out a way to combine it with some of my own theories. I think it could actually work. Karoline leaned closer, studying the diagrams carefully. To Jasmine's relief, she didn't laugh or dismiss the work outright. Instead, her expression softened, curiosity replacing suspicion. This is really good, Karoline admitted. You've taken my idea and expanded on it in ways I hadn't thought of. How did you figure this out? Jasmine shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. I don't know. I guess I just started paying attention. Really paying attention. Your project made me realize how much I've been missing by sticking to safe, predictable stuff. For a long moment, neither girl spoke. Then Karoline smiled faintly. Thanks for showing me this. Honestly, it means a lot. Relieved, Jasmine exhaled slowly. I also wanted to apologize, she added quietly, for everything. The way I treated you during the science fair, and before that, in class. I was wrong. You didn't deserve that. Karoline nodded, accepting the apology without hesitation. It's okay, she said simply. We're both competitive. I get it. Daniel, who had been watching silently from the corner, cleared his throat. So, does this mean you two are ready to put the rivalry behind you? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Jasmine glanced at Karoline, then back at Daniel. Maybe, she said slowly. But I think it could be more than that. What if we worked together, combined our strengths? We might actually be able to accomplish something incredible. Karoline's eyes widened. You mean collaborate? Yeah, Jasmine replied, a hint of excitement creeping into her voice. Think about it. Your expertise in quantum entanglement and my knowledge of propulsion systems, they complement each other perfectly. Together, we could push the boundaries even further. Karoline exchanged a glance with her father, who gave her an encouraging nod. Turning back to Jasmine, she extended her hand. All right, she said with a smile. Let's do it. As they shook hands, a sense of possibility filled the room. For so long, their interactions had been defined by rivalry and resentment. Now they stood on the brink of something entirely new. Partnership. Neither girl knew exactly where it would lead, but one thing was certain. They were no longer limited by their individual talents. By combining their skills, they had the potential to achieve something far greater than either could have imagined alone. Over the following weeks, Jasmine and Karoline threw themselves into their joint project. They spent hours brainstorming, testing hypotheses and refining designs. Their personalities clashed occasionally. Jasmine's impulsiveness sometimes clashed with Karoline's meticulousness, but they quickly learned to balance each other out. Slowly but surely, their prototype began taking shape, blending elements of both their original ideas into something truly revolutionary. Daniel watched their progress with quiet pride, offering guidance whenever needed. He often reminded them that innovation required patience and perseverance, lessons he had learned during his own career. Under his mentorship, Jasmine and Karoline discovered not only the joy of collaboration, but also the importance of humility and mutual respect. Buying. The time their project was ready for its next phase, the tension between them had transformed into genuine camaraderie. They weren't just teammates, they were friends united by a shared vision of the future. And though challenges still lay ahead, they faced them together, knowing they were stronger as a team than they had ever been apart. In the end, the journey wasn't just about science or competition, it was about growth. Both girls had started out focused solely on proving themselves, but along the way, they had learned something far more valuable: the power of lifting others up instead of tearing them down. Months had passed since Jasmine and Karoline decided to collaborate, and their partnership had blossomed into something extraordinary. What began as an uneasy truce evolved into a seamless working relationship, fueled by mutual respect and shared ambition. Together, they poured countless hours into refining their prototype, a groundbreaking fusion of Karoline's quantum entanglement theories and Jasmine's advanced propulsion designs. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, heated debates, and moments of doubt. But through it all, they pushed forward, driven by a vision larger than themselves. The final version of their project was unlike anything anyone had seen before. Dubbed the Entangled Propulsion System, it combined instantaneous communication via quantum entanglement with faster-than-light travel capabilities. At its core lay a compact device capable of sinking particles across vast distances, allowing spacecraft to navigate uncharted regions of space without traditional limitations like time delays or fuel constraints. While still experimental, the system showed immense promise and caught the attention of researchers far beyond Willow Creek. Word of their work spread quickly, thanks in part to Daniel's connections within the scientific community. Soon, invitations began pouring in from universities, tech companies, and government agencies eager to learn more about their invention. One opportunity stood out above the rest: an invitation to present their prototype at the Global Space Exploration Summit, a prestigious event attended by top scientists, engineers, and policymakers from around the world. For Jasmine and Karoline, it was a chance to showcase their creation on a global stage and potentially change the course of human history. Preparations for the summit consumed every waking moment. Jasmine and Karoline worked tirelessly alongside Daniel, who guided them through the complexities of presenting such cutting-edge technology. They practiced their presentation over and over, refining every detail until it was polished and precise. Despite their nerves, both girls felt a growing sense of pride, not just in what they had built, but in how far they'd come together. On the day of the summit, the two teenagers stood backstage, peeking through the curtain at the massive auditorium filled with thousands of attendees. Scientists in formal attire mingled with reporters snapping photos, while large screens displayed images of distant planets and swirling galaxies. The air buzzed with anticipation, and Jasmine couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement mixed with anxiety. "You ready?" Karoline whispered, adjusting her blazer nervously. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jasmine replied with a shaky laugh. "Let's do this." When their names were called, they stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. Spotlights illuminated them as they made their way to the podium, where their prototype sat proudly on display. Jasmine took the mic first, explaining the principles behind their design and highlighting the practical applications of their technology. Her confidence shone through as she spoke, captivating the audience with her passion and clarity. Then it was Karoline's turn. She delved deeper into the science, breaking down the intricacies of quantum entanglement and how it interfaced with Jasmine's propulsion systems. Her calm demeanor and thorough explanations earned nods of approval from even the most skeptical experts in the crowd. When she finished, the entire auditorium erupted into applause once again. After their presentation, questions poured in from the audience. Some were technical, probing the feasibility of scaling up the prototype for real-world use. Others focused on ethical considerations, asking how humanity should responsibly explore new frontiers. Jasmine and Karoline answered each query thoughtfully, demonstrating not only their expertise but also their maturity and foresight. By the end of the session, it was clear that their project had left a lasting impression. As they exited the stage, they were greeted by enthusiastic scientists eager to discuss potential partnerships and funding opportunities. Even seasoned professionals admitted being inspired by the vision of two high school students pushing the boundaries of innovation. Backstage, Daniel waited with tears in his eyes. He pulled both girls into a tight hug, unable to contain his pride. You did it, he said, his voice choked with emotion. You've shown the world what's possible when people work together instead of against each other. Karoline smiled, glancing at Jasmine. We couldn't have done it without you. Or each other. Jasmine nodded, her competitive edge softened by gratitude. Yeah, turns out we're pretty good at this teamwork thing. In the weeks that followed, life changed dramatically for both girls. Offers poured in from universities and research institutions, eager to support their continued work. Media outlets hailed them as pioneers, and their story became a symbol of hope and collaboration. Yet despite the newfound fame, neither Jasmine nor Karoline let it go to their heads. They remained grounded, focusing on improving their prototype and dreaming up new ideas. Their friendship deepened too. No longer defined by rivalry, they discovered common ground in their shared love of discovery and exploration. Jasmine learned to appreciate the value of patience and humility, while Karoline found courage in stepping outside her comfort zone. Together, they proved that greatness wasn't about individual achievement. It was about lifting others up and striving towards something bigger than oneself. Years later, as humanity embarked on its first interstellar missions powered by their entangled propulsion system, Jasmine and Karoline reflected on their journey. From bitter rivals to lifelong collaborators, they had transformed not only their own lives, but also the future of space exploration. Their legacy served as a reminder that even the fiercest conflicts could lead to unity, and that when people dared to dream together, the possibilities were limitless. Standing beneath a star-filled sky, they marveled at the paths humanity now traveled, knowing they had played a small yet vital role in making it happen. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, they faced them with unwavering optimism, ready to push the boundaries of imagination once again.